briefly introduce you to one last project, one building project before we get into the neighborhood scale work that we're doing. I thought it might be of interest to you. I believe that Jason McClellan had this. He lectured here before. I don't know if he's done it this year. Yes. So, of course, he authored a very important strategy called the Living Building Challenge that some of you heard about. And we have a project in Portland that I reported on last year, and I'll report on some of the latest design around it, called the Oregon Sustainability Center. And this is a very important project for us in Portland because it's intended to become a very an iconic, not so much an iconic piece of architecture. I don't think it is an iconic piece of architecture, but a real iconic project in which we take the next step in sustainability, and then where we link economic development, research, and creating a community, a community center in essence around sustainability for our region. So we have this notion of it being a world-class center of excellence in sustainability that celebrates and nurtures the values and strengths of our leadership in climate change, land use planning, smart growth, green building, environmental stewardship, civic engagement, and social justice. So, no small mission statement for a small building. This is the anchor project of one of our eco-district pilots, and I'm going to talk about eco-districts in a little bit. It's located at Portland State's campus. This is the downtown Portland. This is the central city, the business district, and this is the university district. This is about a 7-story project, so it's modest in its scale. It's a context building that's intended to be part of the fabric, but yet to tell a different story. The big idea with the building is that it's intended to be a triple net zero building. And triple net zero being that it produces more energy than it consumes, that it produces more water than it consumes, and it is a zero net carbon emitter of emissions. It's a very complicated project because it includes our Oregon University system. We have 7 universities and colleges within our state university system, in which Portland State is one of them. We have the city of Portland as a partner. We have Portland State University specifically as part of the university system as a partner because it's on their campus. Our redevelopment agency, the Portland Development Commission, and then a series of for-profit and non-profit building tenants and organizations that have come together under the Living Building Initiative. This idea that these companies, these nonprofits, wanted to build this building to create a home for themselves and create a learning environment. It also includes dozens of researchers and other technology companies, including Intel, local utility, Portland General Electric, Sanyo, Voltaire, and others. So it's located again here at the University District. This houses serves about 35,000 students a day. It's more of a commute campus, and it's similar to here, although they're doing a lot of new housing. The idea is to be able to house at least 10 to 15,000 of the students adjacent to the campus within the next 15 to 20 years. So a big housing strategy for the university campus, which is really primarily in the gray, and the central business district, as I mentioned. What we are finding out is when we get into it and when we really start to understand the ability to actually execute a net zero energy strategy, in particular, then the site plan and the orientation and the grid becomes even more important. You all know this as architects and practitioners, that the south facade becomes the powerful engine, if you will, for creating electricity. So for voltaic, what we needed was to be about 10 degrees west of south, just off of direct south in our part of the world and our climate and our as it relates to the axis, sort of rotation of the sun. and most of the powerful sort of solar access comes at the slightly off of south. So we have to orient the building slightly to the west, the facade, and of course that's slightly off the grid. So as a matter of design, we're just sort of moving a majority of the upper floors to sort of become maximum, to get maximum solar data. It's a complicated program with retail, institutional uses of classrooms, something that we're calling a decision theater, which is going to be this multimedia interactive theater in which we can use advanced visualization software to look at different problems and help solve them in a community kind of meeting style. So city councils or metro regional government or local jurisdictions can have meetings on everything from what new developments would do to the sort of visual landscape of the community, and visualize that and help make adjustments on design guidelines or zoning, etc. So there's going to be a research and pedagogy dimension. There's going to be offices for a variety of nonprofits and companies. A city agency is going to be located there. And then there's going to be an exhibit center on the ground floor to tell the story of sustainability and welcome students and delegations from overseas and throughout the U.S. To come here and learn about our story and then take those lessons back into their own life. Again, I mentioned the Living Building Challenge. I won't go into great detail because you've heard about this great detail, and I'm sure Jason went through this in some detail, but it requires baseline performance. It's not a rating system per se, it's a performance spec, and it requires the performance be met through operational analysis. So you can't just get a stamp of approval or a certification when the building is built and occupied. You have to have a year's worth of data backing up the claims. So it requires net zero energy, water, wastewater, and non-toxic materials. It has the Living Building Challenge has 7 focus areas and 20 requirements. There's no, they're all in essence prerequisites. There's no optional rating, points to be gained. You've got to hit everything, and you have to be operational, as I mentioned, for a year. It's interesting to see that. I mean, I've been around green building for quite a long time, and it's interesting to see these rating systems and this evolution. What's interesting about this is I think it's quite controversial. It's controversial on a variety of reasons. Probably this being the most. This notion that buildings are sort of engines on themselves, they're sort of isolated as energy producers and water producers. In an urban context, we have infrastructure that can serve these buildings from electrical production or energy production. We have infrastructure that can serve them from the water and wastewater. Why would we want developers to invest in individual systems on the building scale? Now, in certain cities, that makes sense. I know in Bangkok, for instance, they have no, or traditionally they have no wastewater treatment for many of their large-scale developments, hotels, office complexes. They have to do wastewater treatment in the basement because they don't have the infrastructure to support it. So there's often cities that don't have the infrastructure. A wastewater treatment facility would make all the sense in the world. It's one reason we got into the eco-districts, because we were really interested in this question of what's the role of a building, what's the role of the neighborhood, what's the role of a city or a regional area as it relates to infrastructure, as it relates to technology, as it relates to how we interact as human beings at a neighborhood level, as a building level, as a city. Nonetheless, we got very enthusiastic about this as a demonstration building, as pedagogy. What kind of technologies make sense? How can you monetize it over time? Are they replicable, etc.? What's probably the most important thing from my perspective about this project is this number, 17. That's the energy utilization intensity for the building. So this is a metric that basically, you probably know, I'm sorry if you know this, but it's the BTUs, the kBTUs, and the kilowatt hours smushed into a metric that gives a more accurate understanding of electrical and sort of energy, thermal energy used in the building. 17 is extraordinarily low. This is the national average in the U.S. And we have pretty good building codes. It's not like we don't have building codes. We have pretty good building codes, but we're a highly energy intensive country. We're, and again, one of the most energy intensive countries in the world. So our codes need to be better. So the fact that the factor 5, 6 savings over the national averages is impressive. And then if we look at buildings that have been built, very sort of iconic green buildings in the U.S., most of them don't even come close. The latest is the National Renewable Energy Lab, which is in Golden, Colorado. You know, if you're familiar with Colorado, it's one of the sunniest places in the U.S., and the NREL Labs, which is the national lab for our Department of Energy as it relates to renewable energy, they have a suburban campus, so they have a very big footprint in which to create a bunch of energy. We have a very small footprint. We're on roughly 20,000 square feet in an urban setting in which to produce our energy and to produce this number. So that's quite ambitious. And it's going to require a series of strategies from passive design to active design. The most interesting, again, for me is this occupant engagement, because occupant engagement ultimately is very replicable. You know, technologies might be exotic, they may be more expensive, they may be transferable. Those questions are always out there, but the notion of how we live in buildings and how we interact in buildings, there's a lot to be gained from understanding how we all work in buildings and what you can then translate even to existing buildings to get the kind of savings that you want. But all of this adds up to a net zero strategy. We start with the envelope. We talk about active systems, our heat pumps and our other motors and equipment. We maximize the use of passive systems with slab and mass for heating and cooling. Obviously maximizing daylight and minimizing the amount of electrical lighting needs in the building. We're using earth tubes for passive cooling. We're using radiant, geothermal. There happens to be a geothermal sort of system in that part of the city that we're tapping into. And then, of course, you finish it off with photovoltaics, which is the most expensive, so you really want to minimize the amount of photovoltaics. So this is a typical building, again, in the U.S. By energy intensity, energy usage. So much of it's plug load. Now, so today, this is the real problem for us, and I'm sure it's becoming an issue here because early learning has about 2 computers, I think, and phones and all of that. So plug load is becoming the dominant issue, particularly in commercial buildings. Heating is about 24%, cooling about 12%, in our climate, lighting at 17%. Plug load, I mean, there's some things in plug load that are, fundamental, like you need a copy machine. I mean, there's fundamental things in plug load that you have to account for. But there's a lot of things that are, in essence, choice decisions, and again, have a real impact on behavior. So what we first did is looked at what would the potential savings be without occupant engagement. So with really smart design, we could design a building to be about 63% more efficient than our building code. And that's consistent with some of our best buildings that we've built over the last 5 years. We can get about 50% savings pretty easily now because the engineering community is so good, the architecture community is very smart at this, there's good incentives in that. But to get, and most of that, if you look at the savings, you're now really, you've slimmed up your plug load, you've got lighting that's 1/3 the intensity that you have on a typical building, your heating's down to nothing. You've literally almost eliminated your heating costs, mainly because you're using geothermal and you're using heat pumps with a coefficient value of 3 to 4. So you get about 3 to 4%, 3 to 400% efficiency coming from that. And then, your elevators, you're using very efficient elevators. You're actually really getting people to walk up and down. You see, you're sort of putting the elevators behind the stairs. You're really activating beautiful stairs as a strategy. But then, now you're talking about getting to the energy savings in 75%, where you really have to engage the community. So the plug load now is cut by almost half, and your lighting is cut by a little bit. And so this is going to require not only a strategy, about daylighting and eliminating the amount of electrical load as it relates to lighting that the occupants control, but also creating a whole new dimension of sort of informing and sort of educating ourselves to what's going on in the building right now. So we're working with Intel on a dashboard strategy that's going to both be linked to the computers and linked to the walls, so the dashboards on every floor, and then with a big sort of energy sort of screen or consumption screen at the ground floor. The idea is that we're constantly reminding ourselves where we are in our energy usage. Are we over our, in essence, our footprint, if you will, or a daily sort of caloric sort of diet of energy and water consumption? Are we over? Are we under? How are we performing? We're constantly going to be sort of understanding this in the context of how we work when we're on a computer, when we're walking through the floors. We're looking at competitions for each floor. We'll sort of compete against each other. So there's going to be all kinds of sort of social science that goes into this along with technology to kind of help inform. And there's a lot of really exciting work going on globally on this issue about, they call it the Prius effect. Of course, Toyota kind of introduced us to this through if you've driven in a Prius, through having kind of a game in which you sort of, you kind of, crank up your efficiency in miles per gallon by being constantly sort of activating your brain, thinking about your energy, or in that case, your fuel use in the car. And the same idea here for buildings. What the data shows us is that even on the most modest sort of engagement strategies in the U.S., we get about 10 to 15% savings by just being engaged in the issue of demand management. So we're trying to, ratchet that up by another 10 or 15%. And we don't know if we'll get there. It could be a failure. We all are human beings. We're all very emotional and unpredictable. And you can't sort of. This is not going to be an exercise in in control, sort of a control in which it's going to be much hotter, much cold. Much hotter in the summer, much colder in the winter. We're gonna really work with the tenants to understand kind of what they're doing. It has some pretty interesting technology and sort of strategy. I'll just go through very quickly. Again, we're using geo-exchange. We have it both, instead of using kind of a combined system, we have extraction and an injection well. The idea, of course, is so that we don't start to over tap a particular source of energy that then diminishes over time. You're sort of keeping some distance between the wells so that the constant 60 degrees Fahrenheit is protected over the years. And that's, of course, in the winter when we're looking at roughly a 68-degree building, so we're going to lower the average temperature by a few degrees. For an average commercial building, it's about usually 71. We'll keep the building, we'll keep it a little cooler. In the summer, we're going to allow it to go up to 78 degrees, so it's going to be a warmer building. We're going to wear a t-shirt or a short-sleeved shirt. We're going to, and this is very common, certainly in Europe. In North America, we're used to 71, 72 degrees all the time in commercial buildings. This building is a great example of passively, cooled instead of heated buildings. You have unconditioned spaces. You have sort of passive, at least in the corridors, sort of, a passive strategy. Most commercial buildings, the corridors are conditioned. So we're making some very practical decisions with this building that are done all over the world, but just aren't done in the typical kind of commercial setting. We're going to test something that's quite exciting with Sanyo and Intel as well. We're going to be creating a demonstration floor that doesn't convert the photovoltaics to AC or alternating current, but keeps it in direct current, which is how photovoltaics generates energy. There's a lot of loss created when you create energy from photovoltaics and convert it from DC to AC, and then back often on the computers back to DC. So all those losses from conversion of energy, we're going to just keep it on one floor, have a DC only floor. So we're going to work with computer providers, we're going to work with copy machine providers. We're going to have a floor that's DC only, and then it includes a battery storage so that it creates, in essence, a sort of an overall energy strategy that allows for overnight storage of the energy that we can go back. We're going to monitor what that does for overall efficiencies for the building. We're also going to have a battery for peak load shading, so we're going to have a demand management strategy for the building. And this is something that all cities need to do. We all, all utilities in major cities are susceptible to brownouts, to blackouts, to very expensive energy costs during peak events like peak heat events or peak cooling events. So buildings in cities where they have the ability to control for that peak event by actually having some energy storage that then the utility can then sell back to the building or back to the grid. And so we're working with Sanyo on a peak load shading battery system. We have, to make things really complicated, two utilities working in the building. One is providing the energy to the building. The other is going to buy the energy from the photovoltaics. There's an interesting, and to finish the building, we finish it with photovoltaics, which again, as I said, is very expensive. And there's roughly about 760,000 PW systems. So this is going to be a very large system for a typical urban setting. It includes monocrystalline. It includes bifacial PVs that allows light that's coming down and gets reflected back up, so you get double production. Sanyo's got a very innovative product that we're going to test here. This is bifacial, allows for light to penetrate. So this is a garden, a roof garden, and this is also a roof garden here. We're going to test that. And then we've got horizontal sunshades and vertical sunshades to finish it off. So lots of photovoltaic built into the facade as well. And on the water system side, we're going to have an integrated gray water, potable gray water, black water management system. All the water that's captured on the roof will move down into a large cistern. Because we have a rain drought, so we have a very significant drought cycle, that means our system just has to be that much bigger. A lot of parts of the world where you have much more consistent rain throughout the year, you can have smaller cisterns, you can reduce your overall infrastructure costs. But that's one of the challenges here. So we're going to have a very large cistern that can manage that drought cycle. The water then gets moved. It gets treated as potable, moves back into potable water uses. The non-potable water uses, the wastewater that comes down and is treated in a biomembrane reactor and uses natural swale, which is going to come up, which is going to be an outside public art piece. So it's going to have sort of different levels of treatment. It's going to be finished with this green wall on the ground floor. So there's going to be a lot of opportunity to kind of showcase water management through plants and through sort of natural system management. And so all the water that falls on that's captured and reused for potable uses and non-potable uses then will be recaptured, and anything that goes through the gray and black water treatment then gets back and reused for non-potable uses. Any extra water then will infiltrate into the green street, which is right adjacent. So there'll be a sort of a green street that will infiltrate any excess water into the ground, and it will not go into the city's sewer system.
What capacity does the water tank have, the rainwater storage tank?
We need about a 200,000 gallon tank for this building. So it's all tuned to the total, how much roof area do you have, so how much collection capacity do you have, and then modeling the amount of occupants in the building and the average water use of a commercial building to get to that sizing. So if it was a residential tower, we would size it differently. It's a mixed-use building, we'd size it differently. But this is almost a purely commercial building with some very small amounts of retail on the ground floor. But it does require us to have, in essence, a water budget. And we're going to be monitoring, just like we do with energy, we're going to be monitoring everyone's water consumption in the building to help kind of reduce overall per capita water use compared to a typical commercial building. On the materials side, and again, I'm sure Jason shared this with you, but they have this sort of series of zones from which materials can come from. It's a pretty cool idea to try to source locally within 500 miles. And your zone 1, which is 500 kilometers, is sort of here, and your circles go out, and you can get certain materials, heavier materials need to be sourced locally, lighter materials farther away, and then consultants and others sort of can come from around the world, because the idea is to share knowledge. It's not just about sort of local kind of provincial knowledge and information. We need to share that, so they've made provisions to allow for those who kind of work on the design, consult on the projects to come from farther away with the materials to be And there's a red list. Again, this is probably, I think this may be the most important thing that the Green Building Challenge contributes to the green building movement. I still think that this whole net zero energy water stuff only works in certain contexts, and it's a great research strategy, but it's not how cities really want their infrastructure to kind of be built out, and it's often not cost effective. But the notion that through science we've identified the most carcinogenic and most deadly toxins that are built into everything from the romexin that's found in electrical sheathing to PVC piping, into the chairs and into the furnishings, and the off-gassing of wood and sheetrock and stucco materials. This is important because this is ultimately moving towards the sort of toxic-free environment and marketplace that we need. So there's 14 common materials and chemical components that have been known to be toxic to humans that they're saying have to be eliminated in the buildings. There are some exceptions because there are products you just can't find alternatives. There's just not an alternative in the marketplace. Or you're going to be out of conformance with the local sourcing requirements. So it's there's going to be, and there is a lot of sort of negotiation that will go on with this, with the Living Building Challenge, but it's sending, I think, the right signals and it's the right science to try to move the marketplace on these things. So one of the functions of the Living Building Challenge is that you need to be within 30 feet of daylight, and that you have to be able to have access to daylight and views from every portion of the building. And so we were, in the design work, we were struggling with the interior portions of that which didn't meet the Living Building Challenge. When you stretch out for solar exposure to get the maximum solar, you now were out of conformance with the Living Building Challenge. So when you rotate to 10 degrees south and you create a garden space, now we're able to be within conformance of the Living Building Challenge. In essence, using these spaces as circulation only, but not as this sort of occupant space. So we created, again, another sort of great opportunity, in this Living Building Challenge, it sort of begs new questions about design, about orientation. If you're trying to understand the trade-offs between energy production and access to daylight, in this case, that's one of the key challenges. It required us to do a design that created some opportunities that could be quite nice in creating common space in gardens. And so we built out, based on that sort of test fit, a strategy in which we were then trying to figure out if we could get the program in the building, loading toilets and offices and conference rooms in the middle, and so that the daylight, everyone who's working has access to the windows. So obviously no offices, exterior windows. That's all open floor plate. Easy for, say, a single tenant that owns a whole floor. Pretty difficult if you have a bunch of smaller companies or nonprofits that are now sharing a floor with no walls, because you need to be able to be performant. So there's going to also be some organizational experiments going on between organizations that typically are used to having their own space. And this is sort of shown in the sort of multiple floor tenants. So we're going to have sort of, small organizations like mine, literally in an open platform, which you don't know where one company ends and one organization begins. On the ground floor, that's where one of the large lecture halls will be. This will be where our exhibit center is, and then some retail facing the Montgomery green screen. This is a green sort of thoroughfare that links the upper part of the campus down towards the river that's being built. This will manage the stormwater, and the water management for greywater will be managed here as a public, agenda, sort of public plaza. So urban design is similar to the dry side of the park that I showed you earlier. It's going to be this integration of stormwater management, native plants, and then now even greywater, blackwater management. So this is kind of a new idea that we're testing in Portland that we haven't done before. And then on the second floor, this will be conference centers and open classrooms for teaching and for the community to rent out. And then a very nice patio. And that patio is actually a corporate naming opportunity. Sanyo, it's going to be Sanyo's Energy Terrace, and that's where their bifacial photovoltaics will be on display. And so it provides both an opportunity for shading and for sort of placemaking. And this will be, so the conferences will spill out onto this energy plaza, but also an opportunity to talk about technology and share how that works. With some section perspectives. Excellent study. Some views of the project. It's a modest building. It's not going to win any architectural awards. I should say that, but I'm friends with the architects. But many challenges on how do you deal with living buildings and the requirements, how do you deal with cost effectiveness, how do you deal with placing the project within an existing neighborhood. They're trying to do something this is going to be one of our stops for the streetcar, so they're trying to create a really nicer urban realm in this, in which the classroom is very exposed, so you get this idea of sort of learning and activity at all times. And then on the north facade, we're still working out the details of what that will look like, but a very different, not doing a curtain strategy, probably doing some sort of cast in place facade. And again, we have to be very mindful of the material opportunities given the radius for sourcing the facade materials. We're lucky that we have a very advanced facade manufacturer in Portland, Benson Industries. They did the World Trade Center, the new World Trade Center. They got New York Times, Renzo Piano's New York Times building in New York. They do very cool projects globally. So we've got a very good partner in facade design and manufacturing in Portland. That's just a lucky coincidence. And you can see the bifacial here. So this is going to allow some sun to go through this garden. The idea is sort of hanging gardens that will come down through the middle of this.
What percentage of the energy produced is consumed in the building and what percentage is produced and consumed by others?
It's all within the building. We can't produce enough energy to export. It's all within the building.
Even with a reduced energy consumption, you have all those.
Yeah, that's primarily a function of verticality. What we learned is, you couldn't really build a building over 7 stories because you start stacking people and energy demand. We don't have enough space for the photovoltaics. Primarily, it's the photovoltaics. You just don't have enough surface area because you need bigger heat pumps. You need more. There's more energy being consumed. Less energy per capita being consumed, but still more overall energy being consumed. And so that was also part of the strategy here. We would have loved to have seen a much more gracious, taller, iconic building, but we couldn't build anything over 7 stories to make the living building challenging in urban setting. Now, they do allow you to scale jump. I know Jason probably explained scale jumping, but it basically says if you need more space for photovoltaics, you could go build it on an adjacent building, but then that building needs to go through the living building challenge. So it's sort of an impossible, kind of opportunity. You just end up, doing another real estate deal in that sense, or another investment that make the economics even worse. So we had to kind of live within the energy footprint.
But what percentage of the cost of the building was
energy?
Yeah,
for the living building challenge, or for just the energy strategies?
Oh, like just buying all those solar cells.
So it's a $70 million U.S. project. So it's about $350 per square foot. It's about $4 million for the photovoltaics. The energy, we think that the premium for the whole living building challenge package, water management, energy, just the sort of all the other design components are going to be about 20% beyond that to build a building. So it's pretty expensive. The idea, though, is to make it a learning to understand what of these technologies are replicable, what are not. Again, it's one reason I'm not critical of the living building challenge, but I think it does sort of send us down sometimes a path which is non-replicable. And I think in green building, we have to be very mindful of what are the right strategies for the context of the neighborhood, for the context of the city, understanding what your utilities, utility infrastructure provides, and being really smart. And I think, this is, it's intended to be a real sort of iconic, strategy or place. I worry that it's not going to be replicated very frequently. Just some images from the ground plane. This will be the exhibit center. It'll be, this is just a simple image, but this will be a sort of more dynamic kind of place of exhibits and sort of gathering. And that's the secondary treatment wall for the water system. So this will be water filtering through plants on its final treatment phase. We also mentioned this exhibit center. So we have a really cool exhibit company, an advertising company, Whiting Kennedy, and Second Story. These are essentially like iPhones that are turned upside. They also have technology platforms that can gather large scale tables that are all digitally driven. So you can go in and you can either watch a film as a group of 20 people around a table. You can actually gather information as individuals, so you can have 20 people standing around doing different things. We're working with them on the exhibit design to tell the sustainability story. So this would be rich multimedia, stories about innovators in green building, innovators in land use, innovators in food, and apparel, and all the sort of industries that we want to showcase, and also a lot about how the building is used. And so these are that's the tabletop where you can do kind of interactive media. Each of these will slide away so that you can use the space in the lobby for multiple functions. It can be used as an exhibit center, it can be used as a rental space or gathering space. It's meant to increase the kind of flexibility over time. Okay, so that's your sustainability center. So, in essence, what I'm trying to keep the theme of this city being somewhat consistent is, I think green buildings, particularly in the context of where I come from, in the U.S. and Portland, that became after our sort of 30 years of a journey towards sustainability. That's where a lot of the activities have been in the last 10 years. A real emphasis on the buildings, and it was a really, I think, a well-placed emphasis because we've done our land use, our regional land use planning quite well. Our transportation infrastructure was growing, and there was a lot of smart investments and location. Located in transit where we needed to be, but we hadn't really focused on buildings. We hadn't focused on what buildings can bring to the table as it relates to sustainability. And now we're going to then peel back to another scale in cities, and that's the neighborhood scale. It's a part of the sustainability story that's been lost to a certain extent. We focused on regional planning, on regional transportation infrastructure. We focus on regional land use zoning, and we have done a lot of work at the neighborhood level around revitalization of neighborhoods, but none of it has come through the lens of sustainability. So we're trying to add that layer of sustainability into neighborhoods. And I've had the pleasure of being to Mexico City twice now and wandering some of the inner city neighborhoods. It's a beautiful city. It's a really dynamic city. And like the great cities in the world, it emphasizes neighborhood identity and neighborhood scale and sort of activity and sort of a sense of place. Well, Portland, even though Portland's a much newer city than Mexico City, it too, in its best places in Portland, is where the neighborhoods are really vibrant and alive, and you kind of know where you're at. And I think that all of us who do urban design, development, architecture, planning, we're in this industry because we are so passionate about our cities and our communities, and we understand that buildings don't make a community. It's the sort of fabric in which we place buildings or we do revitalization of our public realm. So we worked with the city of Portland to develop this eco-districts idea, this new sort of strategy, and we had great timing. And I was meeting with the Ministry of Urban Development and Housing today because I was actually pitching them an idea of a 10-city North American eco-districts pilot program that we want to work with Mexico City on. It includes other cities in the U.S. and Canada. And the idea is to create a learning network around this notion of a green neighborhood development strategy. In Portland, in our context, the timing is great because we're going through every 20 years we go through a comprehensive plan for the city. It's required by law, but it allows us to take a look at our comprehensive overall planning strategy, and then we get into great detail at the neighborhood level, particularly in the central city. So as part of that work, the Portland Bureau of Planning and Sustainability did this very interesting analysis, and they called it the 20-minute analysis, 20-minute neighborhoods. What can you get to if you walk 20 minutes in any direction? What services, schools, grocery stores, daycare, transit, parks? What do you have in your neighborhood within 20 minutes, and what are you lacking? And they did a variety of data, they collected a variety of data, and created basically a heat map. And basically, what we're showing here is the brightest colors are the most sort of vibrant 20-minute neighborhoods. There's a rich mix of services, parks, schools, etc. And the darker colors are lousy for the most part. And it's this isn't rocket science. I mean, you do this in Mexico City, and you would know the neighborhoods that are really great, and the neighborhoods that are really lacking in services. This part of the city was annexed in the 1960s and 70s. It's low density, has very little infrastructure, it's quite poor now, and it hasn't had the kind of investment that the rest of the cities had historically. It's also outside of the historic land patterns in which the streetcar grid helped build out the city. Most of the city was built in the 1800s literally in these yellow zones as streetcar neighborhoods. And so as a matter of just land development over 150 years, they became very mixed-use neighborhoods. And they had a lot of services and schools, et cetera, attached to it. So, fundamentally, neighborhoods matter. They're a fundamental geography and cities' sustainability activities we need to pay attention to. We need to create strategy that's, again, sort of coherent and that can actually be replicated. And like I was saying earlier about the technologies in the Oregon Sustainability Center, we need to understand what technologies and what practice at the neighborhood level makes sense in contrast or in complementing buildings and cities. So we're interested in assessing the neighborhood from a cost, performance, regulatory, and community benefit perspective to understand what makes sense in the neighborhood. We're going to talk about this tomorrow at our workshop as we go through looking at an eco-district here in Mexico City, potentially eco-district in Mexico City. So we did about a year's worth of research studying precedent projects globally. Really fine examples of green neighborhood strategies, and there's some really cool projects. I've worked on a few. I worked on the Olympic Village in Vancouver. That's a generational project for all of us who are lucky enough to work on that as planners, finding real estate folks, infrastructure, urban designers. All of us, both within the city and the private sector that worked on that project, learned a lot. And we got to test a bunch of new strategies that the city of Vancouver had never done before. So we were very lucky to do that. And it's, it comes down to green buildings connected to smart infrastructure, and then ultimately the community of people that live in that neighborhood. Because no matter how good your infrastructure may be, you still make the choice of how much electricity you use or how you get around. You still make the choice of shopping locally or not shopping locally. So the people really matter in the neighborhoods. And what we don't know about the Olympic Village in Vancouver is what kind of occupants, sort of activities, what's the culture that ultimately gets created in that very cool new neighborhood that's got all the bells and whistles, but we don't know what the people will do as it relates to how they interact with the technology and the public realm and the infrastructure. And so, for any smart eco-district strategy, you really got to link the three in a very sort of explicit way. We also felt very strongly that it's about the neighborhood's commitment, not about a city's commitment. It's really about a neighborhood figuring a way to commit to sustainability. It's a sense that those of us who live there in neighborhoods, and maybe this, I'm curious to know how how you feel this translates in the Mexican context. But in the U.S. context, we're not waiting for government to sort of solve all problems. In fact, our government is failing us miserably in solving some of the basic needs. Like, we don't have a social infrastructure that I think you have that's so powerful here in Mexico. We don't have the family infrastructure that I think is, from what I can tell from friends of mine that are of Mexican descent in the U.S., that there really is a powerful part of the culture here. We're a very scattered culture. We've moved ourselves around. We're not as connected with our families, and so the neighborhood becomes actually very important as a grounding point for us. If you're lucky enough to live with your family or near your family, or you don't, and you really become part of the community, and that becomes probably one of the most important sort of organizing principles in American culture is the neighborhood. And there's some sort of fundamentals that we're sort of playing with that we think are important. One is that the borders are kind of are not hard. That the sort of notion of centers, not borders. So while you can draw a line around a neighborhood, it's a very soft border. These are penetrated all day long. It's very unusual to know in many contexts that you're leaving one neighborhood and entering another, at least at that edge condition. But there are opportunities in which you start to layer in energy strategies, water strategies, wastewater strategies, district heating and cooling strategy, in which there starts to be integration at the center, but maybe not consistently throughout the whole project. It also begs this question, again, going back to the Oregon Sustainability Center, is what are the beneficial relationships between buildings? We do this all the time in urban design and architecture. We're trying to understand the context of one building in the context of another, or a set of buildings in the neighborhood. But what about a deeper understanding about how the people live there, the mix of uses, the technologies around energy, water, carbon? These things are important also for us to start to think about in the context of designing neighborhoods and buildings. And we think, again, looking at the literature, that there's a sort of set of new principles that emerge around eco-districts and sort of introducing sustainability at the neighborhood level. One is you're employing a whole systems approach to design and to development. Two, you're focusing on place-based strategies, things that are appropriate for the neighborhood that might not be appropriate in other parts of the city. It does require, I think, a new social contract. How you live in a neighborhood, how you relate to your neighbors, how you govern yourselves. And this is, I think, one of the fundamental challenges that we have with this effort is that, again, I don't think our institutions, and I can only speak for Portland, they're not prepared for a new governance. We don't have the current governance that's appropriate for eco-districts. And so we're experimenting with new governance models. What I like to say is sort of neighborhood 2.0. A lot of neighborhoods, again in the U.S. context, spend a lot of time fighting what they don't want. They often don't fight for what they want. And they don't often tend to have the resources to sort of envision and then take on the responsibility for making their neighborhood a better place. And so we think this new social contract and governance becomes fundamental to either eco-districts being successful or being a total failure. And then, you're also talking about matching local needs and capacity. So what services are you missing? What do you want? What do you need? How do you relate to a broader set of infrastructure investments that are regional, like transportation? What are your ends? So, for instance, in transportation, you might have a BRT or a metro stop in your neighborhood, or two or three. But what are the end-use facilities? How can you get around so that you can get safely to the BRT or to metro? How can you make sure that you have penetration so that you have a grid that makes sense and that's not full of super blocks, which is a common phenomenon in the U.S.? How do you have bicycle facilities in the basements and changing facilities and showers? Very fundamental, simple things, but that's part of creating a transportation infrastructure that goes from regional down to the sort of fine grain of the building or the maintenance scale. And then finally, it's just these are dynamic, changing places, and you want them to be. I think projects like the Olympic Village it's not a very dynamic place, honestly. If you go there now, it feels like a shiny new neighborhood. It doesn't feel like it's not a place I want to be in. I'd much rather be in Odessa. I'd much rather be in my neighborhood in Portland that's old and tattered and has a bunch of diversity and diverse people living there. That has a lot of history. So we don't want to focus on shiny new examples as the only sort of response to this global eco-districts movement, we don't want to just say it's a cool new building type and it's all shiny new technology. You want to try to figure out what works within the context of an existing neighborhood. So you start to look at the neighborhood differently. You start to map out strategies in the neighborhood. This is fundamental to eco-districts. You need to have a performance spec, and you have to have the ability to create a footprint analysis of the neighborhood that's consistent with the kind of analysis we do now for urban placemaking. We look at assets in the neighborhood. We try to understand what's going on before we sort of suggest an intervention that might happen in the public realm. Or, if we're looking at a new building, we want to understand the context of how that building sits in the neighborhood. Same thing for eco-districts. We want now, though, to understand some other metrics that are specific around water, carbon, placemaking, energy. We had 9 performance areas that were created, looking at the literature. Everything makes sense. So just to give you a flavor for what we're talking about here, what's the stormwater management strategy? How much water infiltrates in that neighborhood? How much of it goes out of the region, or outside of the neighborhood into municipal systems? How much could infiltrate in that neighborhood, knowing the soil typology and the kind of hydrology in the neighborhood? So you got to understand the water system in the neighborhood. That allows you then to obviously do projects that start to manage stormwater in a different way that creates a public realm that, again, does sort of those 2-for, 3-for kind of benefits that we talked about earlier. Here in Portland, this is the South Waterfront. This is that very polluted neighborhood I was talking about that was the shipbuilding. It's now been redesigned as a green neighborhood, mixed use, high density residential, commercial, institutional uses with the Health Sciences University being the backbone of major employment. This is a new high street in the neighborhood. It's created a stormwater sort of river that runs through that's getting treated as it goes. We've got eco roofs. We've got kind of a cascading effect for stormwater management. You see this in some of the European examples that are common in this work, where you're creating these sort of water features within the neighborhoods to create interesting placemaking. You've got gardens here, you've got little sheds for your gardening tools, pathways, obviously a very nice urban realm. But this thing is functioning as a stormwater management facility. And I can tell you in the U.S. context, we tend to put these things behind buildings, with a bunch of rip-rap rock, sometimes with a fence, probably parking. They're like the crappiest, features of a neighborhood. We're saying make it part of the public realm, integrated into the fabric of the neighborhood. This is Malmo and Sweden. They've done really extraordinary things with their water management to create a really nice public realm. Back in Portland, we started experimenting with managing water from the crown of the street. We started with managing stormwater from buildings and parking lots. But 40% of the city is in the right-of-way. 40% of roads. That's a cool cities in the U.S. So we need to manage the stormwater. A lot of it's got heavy pollutants from cars, debris from tires, oil, other sort of carcinogenics. So we've started to experiment with stormwater features that are in the public right-of-way that are using biofiltration to both take out the pollutants but also manage the water versus dumping it into the storm drains. And now we've experimented enough with this. Now this is part of the business as usual in Portland, it's part of the public realm. So water management becomes important. Well, not just stormwater management, but then potable water management, gray water management. So what are the opportunities in the neighborhood to do district scale solutions? With the Oregon Sustainability Center, we didn't ask that question, which is really unfortunate. It was a lost opportunity. If we're going to do water management for that building, we should have scaled it to treat 3 or 4 or 5 buildings. Because then there would have been an economy of scale that allowed for that project to actually pencil versus sort of needing it to be at 20% beyond a typical building pro forma. And then you obviously can start layering in kind of green infrastructure and some of the habitat, fruit trees, gardening, gardens. This is in Europe. We did a whole urban agricultural strategy for the rooftops in the Olympic Village. How much fruit and vegetables can we produce? What are the kind of policies that the city needs to adopt? What kind of policies do the apartment complexes and the condo, the homeowners associations have to adopt. So it's quite interesting to get into the details. There's a lot of trade-offs and there's a lot of issues to overcome. And you'll see, greater use of green walls. It's become very common all over the world. Managing energy, creating sort of micro-district energy loops. This is our Portland State. By the way, this is our Portland State. So we started modeling the energy. They have a district energy system that that provides energy to about half the building in the district. How would you grow it? What kind of additional energy would we need to produce in the neighborhood to be able to create energy for the rest of the buildings? What's the economic model to do that, etc. We're starting to ask those questions. And when you start to ask those questions at the neighborhood level, you have outcomes like this. This is the Olympic Village District Energy Platform in Vancouver. This is not only a really cool energy plant that takes the heat from waste. There's a large, what we discovered when we were analyzing the neighborhood, there's a large waste main, pure sewage waste that runs through that's on its way to the treatment facility outside the city, runs right under this bridge. If we were to tap into that, we could get the energy similar to using heat exchangers in the ground, tap that energy, and it creates a consistent 70 degrees Fahrenheit amount of heat all day long. Use heat pumps, and that becomes our energy strategy. Mining heat from poop, basically, from waste. Pretty cool. Well, pretty interesting. What's even more interesting is that it becomes a public art piece. So these are LEDs that glow different colors depending on the energy usage in the neighborhood. And so you start to have, again, another sort of moment of learning and sort of understanding where your energy comes from, and then sort of becoming playful with how this, which was viewed by the real estate folks, as they were so afraid of this project. They thought this is very high-end real estate for the most part. There's some social housing in the Olympic Village. We didn't want an energy plant right next door. And we were able to convince them you can do something very elegant, very beautiful, and pretty, tucked in under the bridge and have very little impact to the overall development. And this is what some of the pipes look like. So in Europe, in Northern Europe, in Sweden, Denmark, they've basically converted their whole country to district energy. And we're looking to do this in Portland, but in a very small amount, because we don't have the densities. Mexico City, you have the densities for this kind of thing. And what's cool about it is, instead of every property owner having to make an investment decision when to buy new equipment, replace equipment, determine if they're going to buy an efficient piece of equipment or a less efficient piece of equipment, we all are doing the net present value calculations. We're all having to sort out technology choices. In Stockholm, for example, they have 10 plants that serve the whole city. And that's a utility making those decisions. The utility fuel switches out. They fuel switch the different technologies over the years. They started with oil, and then with the heat pumps, and then with the biofuels. In Stockholm, they've been able to cut their greenhouse gas emissions in half in the last 10 years by fuel switching out their plants and being able to charge it through as part of the tariff to the energy customer. Well, the U.S. in Portland, we have to convince 300,000 homeowners alone to make that choice. Can you imagine? 300,000 homeowners have to make a decision in which one utility in the city of Stockholm makes a decision for 10 energy plants. So from a scalability perspective, district energy is a really important strategy. Looking at renewables. In the Portland State Eco District, we looked at how much solar capacity in the neighborhood so we could understand how to link solar projects beyond the buildings. Solar thermal. This is a project in the village. And then, some of the more common sort of placemaking that urban designers do, connectivity in the neighborhood, what's happening, what are the nodes, are we well connected, are we creating a nice urban realm, are we encouraging cycling and walking over automobiles first? In the case of streets, are we traffic calming the streets? Are we creating a green infrastructure strategy to manage stormwater plus create traffic calming in a more beautiful public realm? I would suggest we start with one of these so I can get back to my whole tell tonight about dying. This is like, it's amazing. I like scurrying across the street. Where's it? It's like a sidewalk. Driving that crosswalk. They kind of entice you to kind of jump out into the street. But I think that could be a very nice thing for the university to do on these projects right there. This is Vancouver, and of course, creating places. This is down at Portland State. This is the largest farmers market in Oregon. Happens here twice a week, and about 20,000 people go through to get vegetables and meats, and it's a really wonderful environment that's grown over the years as our organic food movement has exploded. Then linking, obviously trying to link your rail with your pedestrian realm. And doing it, ultimately putting it all together. So eco-districts is about an integration strategy: energy, water, placement, transit. All of these things coming together in a more coherent way so that you get very clear about what you expect the city to be doing on building infrastructure, what you're asking out of the developers of individual real estate deals. Because one of the real challenges we have at the neighborhood scale is we have building codes that are basically the worst you can do. This is the floor. This is what you're legally required to do. But it doesn't ask the question about what the sustainability agenda for the neighborhood is. And so by creating eco-districts, you can start to create policies, and in some cases, depending on the appetite of the city, regulations about what you want the buildings in a particular neighborhood based on the infrastructure needs that you have and the kind of performance metrics that you set for the neighborhood. So I thought I'd walk you through, to kind of finish, the Olympic Village, and then talk a little bit about how you institutionalize eco-districts. So Vancouver, British Columbia, again, part of my world. It's just about, it's about 500 kilometers away from Portland. It's in Canada. It's an interesting place because it's over 50%. Huh? Yeah, he's Canadian, by the way. Like become bearing. We represent 2 out of 3 countries. All of us today represent 3 countries in North America. Well, it's quite interesting because this is the U.S. border down here. Canada, very interesting dynamic in Canada. I mean, everyone hates the U.S., right? They really hate us Canadians. Most of all Canadians live within 90 miles of the U.S. border. So think about it. They're just inundated by American culture, both media. They're so close to us. And so their identity, there's a tension. I lived in Canada for 2 years. I caught more shit being an American than in Canada. They just love to give me a bunch of trouble for being American, which, fair enough. Kind of obnoxious too. So, but it's quite interesting. So the U.S. border is here, so that's one very strong edge of the city. You've got the Georgia Strait and Burrard Inlet that makes up a very strong edge. These are 1,000 meter, 50 to 2,000 meter mountains. So this is a very strong edge. I mean, these are wilderness mountains that come up right out of it's like a fjord, it comes right out of the water, bam. And then you've got a floodplain that creates, an area that doesn't really want to be occupied because it's floody, it's dynamic, it's sandy soils. And so this has historically been agriculture. These are the sort of surrounding cities of Vancouver. This is the city of Vancouver, roughly here. University of British Columbia is out here. This is Stanley Park, one of the great parks of the world. And this is downtown, a really wonderful downtown that's surrounded by, I think, the longest continuous seawall, public seawall in the world, I think. It's wonderful. And it's a very beautifully maintained public realm. They had the foresight many, many years ago to protect the water's edge of the city. And because the views are so so stunning, it's been a very good strategy from a placemaking perspective for the city. We've got a very nice regional transportation strategy around their SkyTrain and BRT lines. It's well used. It's some of the highest usage in North America. What's interesting about Vancouver is that 50% of the city is non-native English speaking. No, the 50%, I'm sorry, were not born in Vancouver. It's an immigrant city. High percentage of Chinese immigrants in the last 20 years, but quite a few from the Middle East, from Europe. Because it's a Commonwealth country, they have a lot of European influence. I think actually the percentage of non-native speaking, non-English speaking, native Canadian speaking is over 50%. So it's a very diverse city. You'll hear, 4, 5, 6, 7 languages spoken when you walk around the city any given part of the day. There's just people from all over the place. And most of them are quite recent immigrants. And they do a very nice job of mixing and sort of welcoming immigrants in Canada and Vancouver especially. But because of that, there's a very different cultural dynamic. Most of these people coming to Vancouver are quite used to living in smaller spaces and really having small homes and using the public realm as part of their everyday sort of experience of how they live in the city. Very different from the American context where we're used to a lot of land, we have a culture of building bigger and bigger, and I think we underestimate, unless you're in some of the great cities of the U.S. like New York or San Francisco, we under-recognize the public realm as an important part of our culture. And I was interested to hear in so much of the public realm work here in Mexico City that's somewhat consistent here as well, that you're really reintroducing the public realm again into the city, which is really exciting. Highly dense city. Some call it Hongcouver. It does look like Hong Kong to a certain extent. It's one of the most sort of changing cities. It's changed so rapidly. It's actually disconcerting. If you go there, I live there. The buildings are being knocked down left and right. There's towers in the cranes in the air. It probably feels a little bit like what it's like to be in Chinese cities right now, where the whole darn place is changing, overnight. The downside of all of this is that much of the historic fabric of the buildings is gone. They just have, the real estate values are so high, the developers are just building. They're building a lot of glassy, high-rise towers. They've introduced something that's now kind of a global phenomenon in Vancouver called point towers. And it was a very clever idea of creating very precise amounts of light and air between the buildings. You didn't reduce the amount of views into that. And it was a real estate deal. It was really to help increase the overall valuation of the buildings. But it also had the benefit of having better air and light. And it's a rainy climate in the winter. It's pretty dark because it's in the northern tier, so light really matters in Vancouver. They also invented they call it kind of the point tower on a podium, so you still have a base condition of townhouses on the base, so you do create a pretty strong urban edge. But I think what Vancouver is suffering from an urban design perspective is just too much of the same thing. They just have built too much of the same product, if you will, over the last 10 years. But it's still a really dynamic place. Because of all this density, you have 50,000 people now living downtown in a very small footprint. You've got great schools and community centers. It's just, the retail areas are really vibrant. There's a lot going on, and then you've got this wonderful park, Stanley Park, at the end of the city. That's just a wilderness within a 20, this is from here, it would take you 30 minutes or 40 minutes to walk to Stanley Park, just to give you a sense of distance. It takes you about maybe 20 to 30 minutes to walk on the sides of the garden. So the Olympic Village is located in one of the last remaining sort of undeveloped spots in the downtown area. This is Falls Creek. This was a filled-in wetland and sort of marsh and stream bed that, like every city got filled in. And it was industrial and polluted. Shipbuilding, other sort of industrial activities over the years. The city assembled the land, they bought the land with the intention of redeveloping. The Olympic Village is right here in the middle of that. Here's some of the historic imagery of the neighborhood. Some of the shipbuilding that went on. A lot of pulp and forestry because of this huge timber economy of British Columbia like it is in Oregon. So the city assembled the land and then went through an excruciating 13-year process to develop the strategy for Southeast Falls Creek. was always envisioned to be a demonstration green neighborhood, a global example of what you can do with a new neighborhood in a dynamic kind of urban setting. But many years of planning, and the city owned the land, which is quite different than a lot of developments in which you have to assemble private developers assemble land. There was a series of strategies for everything from energy to water to stormwater management to urban agriculture. I mentioned the city systematically looked at all these things, and then created an integration strategy. So this is one of the first, I think, best sort of new built examples of integrated green neighborhood development. Another thing they did is they decided they were getting tired of those point towers, and they wanted to create a more European kind of low density, sort of 5 to 7 story condition, which was quite new to Vancouver. They were really used to sort of going really high or doing development in neighborhoods that had a setback. So the sort of to the edge development was quite new, particularly at this scale. And so they spent a lot of time debating the policy implications of this, as only planners can. They debated it. They have only a few pieces of historic fabric. Again, it's one of the challenges in Vancouver, including this facility, and there's another facility down here, down in this portion of the development. This is the Olympic Village. This is what got built for the 2010 Olympics. And then these are private properties that ring it, and much of this is being built out right now. It all rolled up into what they call an official development plan. This is very typical for Vancouver. They have these official community plans. The city has a very strong regulatory framework. So when the city designs an official neighborhood plan, they basically create spot zonings for the private, anyone that has property, owns property. You negotiate your development with the city. In Portland, we have something that is zoning by right. You can't negotiate. You have whatever the zoning calls for in Portland, Oregon. That's your right. And there can be incentives to grow bigger or create public benefit. But in Vancouver, you got the ability to negotiate, and that's a very powerful mechanism, particularly in a city that's got tremendous growth, and particularly a lot of foreign investment in Vancouver. We've got some of the early development was led by a Hong Kong billionaire that led to the sort of real estate dynamic that's happening in Vancouver. That's this negotiation of private lands then allows for public benefits like affordable housing, community centers, green building requirements, daycare, all of these sort of community assets. It's something that we would love to have in Portland, but we don't have the mechanisms, nor do we have the land value for Vancouver has. But anyway, this is the official development plan. Called for a bunch of new parks, extending their seawall, a community center, a school, 3 daycare centers, an art center, and some other sort of wonderful assets for the group. It's 33 hectares, ultimately built out for 15,000 residents, 2.5 million square feet of development. What they call in Vancouver complete design. Complete community. The Olympic Village was just one development. There's 3 phases of the publicly owned land, Olympic Village being the first. It was to house approximately 2,000 athletes and 600 officials. It had to be built at once, and so that was a very risky proposition for the real estate developers who came in. There's been a tremendous amount of problems because it was all built at once while the economy tanked. The city is now in receivership of the development. The developers defaulted when the global economic downturn came. Fortis, the hedge fund that was the real estate or the financier of the whole project, pulled out. The province and the state had to become the bank to the project. It's become a pretty big mess. But the city can hold it in a long-term position, and they'll ultimately make their money back. But the project got caught up in the global economic meltdown and became very embarrassing for the city during the Olympics. And unfortunately, because the project's quite good, it overshadowed a very good community development. Sometimes those things happen. It has a green infrastructure strategy that includes rainwater management for the whole neighborhood, a neighborhood energy strategy for the neighborhood, an integrated park and urban agricultural strategy, a foreshore reclamation and habitat enhancement strategy. So it goes on. We did all of this stuff together in an integrated fashion. A 3-stream waste management strategy. So it was the first place that the city experimented with organics. They already did, metals and glass and paper and other recyclables, but it was the first place where they experimented with organics. That then ultimately has become citywide. And then a multimodal transportation strategy that included, because it's Vancouver, also ferries between downtown and Vancouver. On the building side, it included very high energy requirements for the buildings, a LEED Platinum rating for the neighborhood, a series of water management strategies, including dual flush toilets, 50% green roofs in urban agriculture, and a 75% diversion rate for construction. You can see here kind of the integrated strategy around public space, plazas, a large park called the Hinge Park, transportation that includes downtown. This is a roadway and new Canada line, which is the extension of the subway. There's a subway station here, a streetcar that will eventually come to the neighborhood. So a very integrated overall in the infrastructure, including the energy strategy. And I mentioned here's that energy strategy over under construction. So the energy strategy included passive strategies for the building along with delivering of green energy. One of the things that was really fun that we did on this project that I got to work on was actually creating a policy for passive design. So the city had very strict design guidelines, but it was all about aesthetics and placemaking and urban design. Well, what if you start to layer in passive design? The city actually had some disincentives that really discouraged passive design, mainly about the percentage of occupied and non-occupied space. So it sort of encouraged really skinny corridors, for instance. It didn't encourage passively ventilated corridors like we have here in this building. It didn't allow for passive stacking. And it didn't really encourage sort of exterior staircases. So we did some things that has ultimately helped inform the total urban design work in the city that's translated to other projects. You'll see this in shading, exterior shading devices, having light wells and stairwells on the exterior so that they become really pleasant places to walk. They're lit so they're safer. And they also create the ability to do stack effect and bring air through the building, through the corridors and out the stairwells. We really got very fine into the details around cross ventilation and even created these cooling ponds between the buildings so that this created an updraft of cool air that then was triggered by some of the cross ventilation coming off Falls Creek. So much of this was designed into the ultimately individual buildings, but they had to sort of look at it from district scale solutions or set of issues that hopefully made sort of better decisions. We looked at a variety of shading devices. The green roof strategy, you can see this is one of the construction. So every roof was green, and a percentage of that had agriculture. So it wasn't just for stormwater management, it was also for growing food. We worked on sort of radiant heating cooling strategy in the buildings, in which it was the first development in Canada to use these compilatory mats in the ceilings that then were stuccoed or sheetrocked over that created both cooling and heating. That was the delivery of energy to the building. They're quite efficient. They allow for very slow, very slow sort of infiltration of heat and cooling. Obviously radiant. And this is one thing that we don't know how they're working because the project is so new and it's I think only 30% occupied at this point. I understand, I think they're working well. As you can see, the cross-section of these mats that were installed in the ceiling of the buildings. There's an energy center in the building, the delivery of heat from the energy to the energy platform in the neighborhood, and then goes to an energy system that then is distributed in every commercial and energy space. We experimented with passive in-line fan and in-slab duct work. So here you can see the refrigerator. We ducted intake air that then came in behind the refrigerator in the winter to create heat because refrigerators are shedding heat. So this allowed for a heating strategy within the suites. And then exhausting cool air out. We created an energy monitoring system. Again, it's kind of like the dashboard I was talking about in the Oregon Sustainability Center. Every suite has a BTU, an electricity meter. This is unique in that most buildings in North America, in the U.S. and Canada, are not individually metered. So you end up having a master meter, and then you have no way to incent behavior in a particular apartment or condo unit. This provides the sub-meter using pulse technology so that every suite gets a bill, and then you ultimately, through your monitoring, you try to sort of encourage you, obviously, to use less. So this is a particularly innovative strategy that Vancouver hadn't used before, and the utility helped innovate on this and created some incentives and technology that we deployed in the village. Again, the energy system. And that's how it works. You basically, through the sewer, we created a pump station. We mined the heat using heat exchangers. We had to create a grinding system because obviously sewage can really create real problems for a heat exchanger. So we pre-grind the sewage that comes into a holding box. The heat exchangers are there. Then we flush the heat exchangers every day to make sure that we don't clog the heat exchangers. Again, there's only one system in Helsinki and one system in Tokyo that we can go view. So this is quite new technology. Even though it's a very simple idea, the devils and the details of whether it's going to work and work over time. That energy then is put through a heat pump and then delivered to each building. The return temperature goes back, and so it's a closed loop system. We included solar thermal in a seniors housing project. So seniors, a low-income seniors housing project is a net zero project because we included solar thermal as part of the strategy. So the solar thermal energy production offset the district utilities production to create net zero. And we also were able to capture heat from the grocery store below in this building to heat the seniors housing project. And of course, seniors housing projects are really tough because they're in their homes a lot. They're fairly inactive. They don't move around. They don't go to work. So they tend to have more energy intensity in seniors projects. They also like it warmer, typically, in a cold climate, and they watch a lot of TV. So all of that energy load needs to be dealt with. And so the fact that we could get a net energy project out of the seniors housing project is quite exciting. And you can see here on the construction some of the public realm. This is an area of town that we could barely get through, so it's a nice addition. This is the community center. So it's not motorized boats like canoes and kayaks. There's a gym, there's a daycare center. This is daycare, this is a children's play area, restaurant, a big public plaza. This is a water river here, and then a historic building, which is a restaurant. So we did a series of water management strategies. This, I think, is also one of the most exciting parts of this, because this is not just a single project. This has helped inform the city on its stormwater management. And again, I think there's a real opportunity here in Mexico City to really do much more expressive stormwater management that gets linked to the public realm, and you start to be able to clean your water and conserve your water in different ways. Like we are starting to do in the Pacific Northwest. So what was really interesting is they had to design this hinge part This park, because of the seasonal nature of rainfall in Vancouver, had to basically flood, in the winter, and then and it's drawn down because it's a drought cycle in the summer. So, from just a public realm perspective, we wanted to create really beautiful sort of tiering that once when the water drained down in the summer, this was still an attractive. It wasn't just kind of like a mud pit that kind of drained down and filled back up. So, very careful bioengineering of this park that ultimately looks like this now. This is, with it filled up with water coming out of the rainy season, but it can flood even higher. So it's still got room to grow as the rainy season swells the water, and then it can ultimately go down to kind of a trickle in this sort of individual kind of, it's almost like a slough or a canal in the summertime. It also created the first habitat island associated with the city. Most of False Creek is literally hardscape and riprap. It's got no ecological functionality value at all. It's really a missed opportunity over the years. Well, this was the first opportunity to kind of look at bioengineering that habitat island. And now it's a rich habitat for bird life. There's a rookery of bald eagles that live there, fish habitat. It's quite a nice thing. And this is where the river comes out. So the water drains into here. And during low tide, you can walk over and hang out on the island. High tide, this fills in. And so you have sort of stepping stones. So it's a very dynamic, kind of nice place to be. Rainwater strategy is part of this rainwater harvesting on all the roofs down to a common set of cisterns that then are used for irrigation in the district. That's just a simple detail. You've seen this, I'm sure you've designed some of these in your career, so it's pretty common. Down it goes, it's treated for toilet flushing and for irrigation. But again, done at a district scale, not done at a building by building, so it's much more cost effective. Including the green roof strategy I mentioned. For water management, cooling towers. Then we created a bunch of public art. As part of it, a really nice public realm. And then preserving just one single building. So some highlights from this project as a model eco-district. 13 years of public process, led by the city. Clear sustainability metrics, indicators, targets, goals that the city and the developers had to meet. An official development plan for the neighborhood. And then a big stick in rezoning power. So the city has a big authority to be able to extract the kind of public benefits out of the developers. The public financing provided for the public amenities. The city has a $1.2 billion real estate fund. We were able to invest that money into the public infrastructure, then get paid back through the sale of the land to the private developers. And then the city drove the affordable housing agenda, in which politically became a bit of a nightmare because parties changed and they cut a bunch of the social housing and they tried to add it back. It became an embarrassment. So the social agenda from a housing and affordability perspective is quite limited in this neighborhood because of political tensions. Integration with site servicing, so we learned a lot from integrating water management, rainwater harvesting, district energy strategies around demand management. We learned a lot by creating a set of performance metrics with the developer who was developing the land. And that we created incentives for the private land surrounding it to encourage it to look into the system. So I think I'll end there. I've got a few more slides, but I think we've run out of time. And I think what I wanted to leave you with is simply, this idea of this eco-district movement. It needs a consistent set of frameworks to do the work. And I showed this set of images just to leave you with, as how you layer an eco-district strategy within an existing neighborhood. Because I think most of our cities are built out, and what we're going to work on tomorrow in our workshop is the existing neighborhood. And in Portland, these generational projects like We Live in Village, they're really cool, but they come around very infrequently. But existing neighborhoods like this, you see this in your city all day long. Existing buildings, some surface parking lots maybe. So the strategy here would be to create more efficient buildings, look at passive strategies in existing buildings, perhaps green infrastructure and renewable energy, linking them to district utilities like district energy, creating more end of use or end of mile, what we call end of mile sort of transportation, mobility options, active transportation, car sharing, bus, rail, the kind of facilities that our buildings need to encourage that kind of use. Layering in the green infrastructure, as we've seen a lot of examples of that tonight. And then finally, focusing on the people and what the people are doing in the neighborhood. If performance metrics, the people in the neighborhood need to know what they are and be engaged in how to actively manage their neighborhood. And this is a new world, a new realm of sort of social science and technology of how you engage people in new ways. So with that, I think I'll end. And hopefully we have time for some conversation. If you guys are all exhausted and need to go home, I understand it, but I'd be happy to stick around. And Darren's just gonna, just to entice you for tomorrow, for those of you who are going to be here tomorrow, just do 5 minutes on the neighborhood that we've chosen to work on with you, and a little bit about his new platform for social engagement.
Thanks, Rob. So you guys have been sitting here for a while, so I appreciate your patience. Is Alex still there? Alex, so I gave you a little challenge to add an idea.
Things here. So that was a tag I added.
So I'm Garrett. I'm here to help Rob out. I've been a big supporter of eco-districts and actually trying to bring the whole concept down to California to help them implement their regional climate action plan requirements. But I found one of the biggest challenges was the amount of time it takes to get these projects go through the public process and then to collaborate. So we developed an online platform that basically uses the idea of sort of virtual sticky notes for you to post ideas, sketches, drawings, and then for people to live comment on them and then vote. And you can even use it for participatory budgeting on a certain project. And so we're actually going to use it tomorrow. And what it does is it makes for much more time-effective meetings, but also people that are at great distances can actually contribute online and live. I've got a little postcard for those of you that aren't attending. You can go to the website, and if you aren't going to be there tomorrow, you can actually participate live from your mobile device, from your iPhone or iPod Touch, or from your computer, from anywhere. From those who are going to be in the session, we're going to work both on paper and on the platform. So, Alex, this is the little idea that you had added down here. And this is actually a fun project. This was a map that's all public. You guys can go to it on the CrowdBright website. And during the Eco District Summit that Rob hosted in his organization in Portland, he had people from all over the world. And we realized there wasn't a map of eco districts that Rob just sort of outlined all in one place. And so people during the session were able to post their projects. So we basically crowdsourced the map. So people were able to, this was Treasure Island in San Francisco, where I'm located. I think we've got Oberlin College, and then some projects in Europe and Asia. I don't think we've got all the ones in Asia yet. And then you can just post your ideas. So to use the system, you just go around these virtual sticky notes. You can type in an idea. You can click add an idea. That idea gets moved on the plan. You can locate it wherever you want, and you can tag it to a specific property. And then I think Alex actually made a comment, or I made a comment on his idea. And then actually each sticky note is like a blog, and it can have all sorts of ideas. So we're actually using it for construction projects to tag plans, to quickly mark them up, and to basically have an online dialogue for projects. So that's the map. And there's a little viewfinder up in the corner. And you can move around in the viewfinder. You can go and see all the ideas and plans that are in the live canvas. And the voting is over here, and that's how you can drag and drop your vote on this Yellowknife project, and then place a vote there. So then if you're using, I think Alex has the iPhone app up, which is in the iTunes store, he can actually vote and comment live. So we've had 2,000 people use the system at once. And then you can invite your friends and share it with Facebook and Twitter and all that kind of thing, and basically grow the amount of people engaging in your project for no cost or minimal cost. And then the system generates 3 different kinds of reports that automatically summarize the results in real time for you. So the one that we're going to start with tomorrow was these images that Rob showed of actually creating an eco-district in an existing neighborhood in Portland. What are the key elements, what are the essential elements of a successful eco-district? So over 2 days during the conference, these were the ideas that the participants included, and here are the 9 performance areas that they're being evaluated on. And then we were able to very quickly, in the system, organize the ideas, put the top ideas, report out, and then give people awards, prizes, whatever. But it makes it more interactive, fun, and especially during a design charrette type process. One of the frustrations and one of the reasons why we designed this was we worked with the Council of Canadian Urbanism on a charrette in Montreal. We spent about $70,000 in one day, all the top designers from across the country, and then all the plans were rolled up and everyone said, thank you very much, we'll get back to you. Nothing happened. So when you're doing design charrettes, design processes, this is up in real time, the public can comment it, the designers can comment on it, and it's a clear and transparent process. So there's a feed page that shows you all the ideas that come into your projects. There's Alex's ideas. I think Hector at the ministry commented, and other people on some of my comments today. So they all live come into my phone, so I can track 20 projects at once from anywhere where I'm located. And then we're just going to talk about the project for tomorrow. So this is the canvas that we're actually going to load up for tomorrow. And we don't know, we're not experts in the area, you are. So we're going to be relying on your expertise. And a lot of these images were actually supplied from the ministry for us today. And so we're going to be asking people tomorrow to think about eco-districts, to think about what an eco-district would look like in the context of Mexico City, given the politics, given the climate. We're going to do some asset mapping and hopefully populate this canvas with all of these ideas. And those of you that can attend can log in and participate and see what happened during the workshop and follow up in the weeks after. Here's the base plan for the area. And for those of you that sign up, we're on an email list. We will load these up tomorrow, and we will send you out an invite, and you can, with one click, you can join and then log into the project, and then add your ideas.
So we promised that we'd get back to the ministry with all your ideas for this neighborhood. They're quite intrigued by this idea of eco-districts. You know, of course, that neighborhood with the public realm investments that are currently underway, they're quite intrigued with what other sort of investments in rehabilitation of buildings, new buildings, the kind of performance metrics that we're suggesting, which is not at all in their thinking. So it's a really good opportunity for you as students and as practitioners to, if you're there tomorrow, great. If you're not, do provide some feedback, because it's going to go to a ministry, the Mexico City ministry, and we hope it informs them to consider, layering into this notion and start to actually move on kind of eco-districts for others. So, they made no promises, obviously.
And actually, and just a personal interest, our interest would be to have our platform in Spanish version as well in the future. So we're looking at this sort of as a test case. There's interest in Mexico for products such as this. And then if you want to go in and look at some other projects that are all over the public, I think there are about 30 or 40 in there right now. You can just go to the website and log in. And there's one resilience plan for New York City in Manhattan, a design competition for a micro apartment. So we're working at regional scales, countrywide scales, and actually right down to like 420 square foot apartment in Soho in New York. And this was sort of the commenting. I know Rob just participated in a jury competition in Vancouver. This was this jury competition for this architecture project, and the jurors participated remotely, live, and worked up the plans and selected the winner remotely. And interestingly enough, we have, in 5 months, we have 4,500 users of the platform. This is a little out of date, but I still don't have any in Mexico. I think I have 3 as of today. We have representation, I think, now in 225 cities. So it just shows that once something's on the internet, there's some good ideas. And the ideas of how to build successful eco-districts, people start to provide their comments and then share them with others, and it sort of can go viral.
Is there any kind of filter for ideas and for the projects?
I'm sorry?
Is there any kind of filter for the projects?
Not yet, because we really haven't done a very controversial project yet. As the administrator that creates the platform, I can delete any inappropriate comments, and there are some ground rules. But generally, we require people to sign in, with their real names, so we know who they are. There's not anonymous posting, so we want to ensure that people are vested in actually creating a better future and participating.
Yeah, but also like if you can post any project, you get too many projects. No? The thing with the web is that you have too much information and
Right.
you won't.
So that's a good point. So you can't create your own projects right now. We're handpicking the projects. And so you can propose one to us, but we're sort of being selective, and we want high quality projects that people care about. And we don't want, there's some different sort of crowdsourcing websites that aren't visual on maps, but they're giving out prizes and awards and points and all these things. We want to vote up projects that people are passionate and they care about. This is sort of just a glimpse of the future. Rob talked a lot about Vancouver. This is sort of where the technology is heading. How many of you have a mobile, a smartphone? How many of you have an Apple product? BlackBerry? So with any device that has an accelerometer, compass, a GPS, and 2 cameras, you can use it for sort of embedded reality. So the vision of this is we can use this kind of platform to get public input very quickly. We can help accelerate the ideation part of creating an eco-district. We can do it in real time. But imagine walking down the street in Vancouver, they have to post, Rob said, every rezoning, and they're inherently controversial. So they have to post their signage, and everybody gets the opportunity to provide input. So they have a QR code on the sign. You can click it with your mobile phone. It would take you into the website. You could watch the video from the last meeting while you're standing on the street. And then it would say, would you like to see what it's going to look like from your present location? Click yes. And then it shows you the proposed tower from where you're standing on the site. Then you can go in and add little sticky notes based on the criteria that are established by the city or eco-district criteria, and say, yellow sticky is building height, color, materials, scale, shadow, and provide your feedback on the project, and it goes right into the mayor's cell phone or what have you. So it's changing the dynamic of public interaction. Hopefully it'll improve public dialogue. And we're also finding in New York that not only can we crowdsource a neighborhood and maybe moving towards accelerating attainment and implementation, and then you hit the city and their 8 different departments for approval, and it sort of grinds to a halt. And so now we've got the city of New York looking at basically loading plans and having all the departments log in and provide their comments in an open and transparent way. So we hope that that sort of changes the design review process as well. So hopefully we'll, I'm sorry?
The bureaucracy?
Hopefully we can slice through some of the bureaucracy but still maintain high quality projects. And we look forward to seeing you tomorrow and getting your input in how to create an eco-district in the downtown. And for those of you that aren't going to be here tomorrow, maybe you could give me your email address and we can invite you with the passcode, and then you can participate on your email.
And you can participate even after tomorrow night. Obviously, tomorrow night there'll be a tremendous amount of sort of information that gets generated through each of the tables working on this and the students. But then there's an opportunity for later. In fact, it's something that will be fun to talk to the professors about. Bringing this thing up and sort of kind of peer reviewing it. So it can live on. And again, we'll share that. We'll share that with the
And I've got some little cards here with instructions. I'll just put them up here at the front. Okay. Thank you guys very much.